Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Knocked Conscious. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with Jerome. He's the author of the book Evolution Ended. It was a great conversation. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. No worries. Well, welcome.
Thank
So,
you.
Jerome, Evolution Ending, is that the name of the book, sir?
Evolution ended.
Evolution Ended. So, welcome to Not Conscious. Tell us
Thank
about
you.
yourself. Tell us about this book. I'd love to delve into all these different points because I'm sure I've got ideas and you've got a lot of thoughts. So, welcome and share with us your ideas.
Well, thank you. By way of background, I've had two areas in life that fascinated me, and one is the brain. When I was 7 years old, when I was getting dressed for school, I used to watch these neurosurgery shows that were on at 6:30 in the morning for doctors, and I got very interested as a kid. And then later on, I got very interested in engineering, especially electronic engineering. So I put them together in most of my experience, and Evolution Ended brings together the evolution of the human brain with the evolution of artificial intelligence to talk about how humans are evolving into something completely different due to technology.
So, are you kind of doing it akin to the singularity prospect? Is it similar to that concept?
Well, not entirely, because we're not worried about AI going off on its own and taking over things. But what we're saying is that the survival pressures that humanity and really all living things go through have now been relieved due to our technology. And in the early days, probably the inflection point for technology was back in the late 1950s after World War II, or the 1960s, when we started to get technologies like the birth control pill, great antibiotics, and things like that, that allowed us not only to survive from a health perspective, but also to control our reproduction. And so in the wild, the species that evolve are the ones that actually reproduce the most, and they become dominant in the environment, and provided they can survive in the environment, well, all of a sudden we could decide whether we reproduced. And with all our new technologies, we controlled the environment. We didn't have to adapt to the environment. We could engineer our environment to adapt to what we wanted. And then as we went into the future, we could adapt our appearance through cosmetic surgery to be what we wanted. So it wasn't about attracting a mate. We could engineer that too. We could engineer fighting wars. You don't have to be the big, strong alpha male when you have drones that can fight your wars for you. So those survival pressures have gone away. And now, what is going to become of humanity now that even our brains can be enhanced by external things?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I just had a podcast yesterday with Laura Johnson Dalkey, and she wrote a book about ectogenesis. And we're basically talking about Brave New World and
Mm-hmm.
how basically they're going to be able to have artificial wombs just pump out whatever meat blob babies are going to come out.
Mm-hmm.
We do not know what the effect of that's going to be. We do not know what an artificial womb is going to create. It's going to create some kind of human cell species thing, but we don't know what's going to be in that thing. We just don't know. We haven't experienced it yet. So it's a
Well,
very interesting look, into that. But you said that to your point, we've controlled our environment. We've now done this, and evolution used to be based on pressure, right? To your point.
mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
have you had now with that? We Here's a great analogy. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I'm at a Taco Bell,
Mm-hmm.
and I placed my order, and it was surprisingly not $100 like it is now, but it was something like $15.60 some. So I gave the attendant $21, and you know exactly where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
Off the top of my head, it's 16 minus 21. I'll get a $5 bill back and the change. And even 20 years ago, this kid's looking at me puzzledly with the two bills, and he hands me the $1 bill back. And I'm like, no, I'd like a $5 bill back. Go ahead and put in the $21 and see what number comes out. So I'm assuming this is that was an early stage of this part where we don't even calculate anymore. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
even count.
Well, it turns out that we have cadres of software engineers whose job it is to make things easy for us, make everything we do a no-brainer because we have all this software. And it turns out, as part of the research in the book, we found that human IQ has been declining by 1 point per decade, really for the whole 20th and 21st century. And again, it's back to that pressure. You don't have the pressure to be smart. You know, we've all seen these sci-fi movies where you see humans have evolved a million years into the future and they have these gigantic pulsating brains. And yet that will never happen because there's no evolutionary advantage to that happening. Even Richard Dawkins, the famous anthropologist, says, what's the advantage of being smart in the 21st century? And quite frankly, there isn't any, because we're going to survive and prosper either way. And so all these things are combining together. It's almost undeniable that we're declining in capabilities. You're right about the change. I knew exactly where you were going. And everything else. We can't find our way to our parents' house without Google Maps these days.
Yeah. So to that point, would you say this is a secular systemic issue of a society, as in a society grows, it evolves, it becomes large? You know, what is it? Hard times create tough men create easy times create weak men. We talk about the fourth turning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this
Mm-hmm.
kind of has this happened throughout civilization with the Greeks and the Romans, where technology is kind of stopped our evolution for a hiccup in time, and then we came through some dark ages for a while and had to work our way out of those areas again?
Well, it's all very interesting. The Fourth Turning is an interesting book that we share a lot of common readers. Um, I don't think this is cyclical though, and I'll tell you why. The main reason is the technology is completely moving in one direction, and the cycles of how humans interact between tough leaders and such, that is cyclical, and we see that maybe in our elections even today. But in general, technology is moving forward, and we're losing to some extent the paradigm of the alpha male and the strong leaders. You know, genetically, most people are followers. They're much more comfortable following. They generate stress hormones when they're put in charge. There are about 10 to 20% of people who are genetically suited to be leaders. They have different hormonal makeups, which can vary. But these days, leadership is changing. Leadership is becoming influence, and we're all becoming equal nodes on the internet where we can be influencers, whether we're big and strong or not, through our ability to communicate. We're making collaborative decisions. Our AI is the actual embodiment of that, because artificial intelligence, the way it works now, is trained on the sum of human knowledge. So when they train
Right.
up these large language models, they feed it a whole bunch of stuff from the internet, which is basically the average of what humans are thinking. So
Yeah.
now AI is becoming a statistical mimic of what society is thinking, depending on how they do it. And so we're all going to be equal nodes, and we're going to have avatars in the future that are going to be AI avatars that look like us, act like us, are basically indistinguishable from us, that are going to be out on the internet, out and about, doing our work for us, representing us, making opinions that we would probably make, and reporting back to us later. But it's a totally different model of how humanity will work.
It Yeah, it's very fascinating in that respect, because to your point, leadership, I think I think people who don't want the leadership are the ones who need to be who need it thrust upon them, it seems, because the people who want it seem to want it for reasons, right? There seems to be
Mm-hmm.
a reason for it. So we would hope that the technology would balance out the power across, because information is data, information, that is the currency by which we go now.
Mm-hmm.
As the internet
Mm-hmm.
grows, we still are finding that the means to get into something early, for example, like a Neuralink, if someone gets ahead of the game, they can really differentiate themselves from the rest of humanity in this case, right?
Hmm.
Is
Hmm.
there any kind of challenge to, or any thought to how to navigate those challenges by making the technology even across class as it is across? Because once again, obviously we know that money is a driver for technology and for things like that, and money is what makes things happen. But with this change, our evolution changes from a need based, right? Those things we need, we don't need to jump in front of the mountain lion anymore.
Hmm.
So, a woman has a firearm, she can protect herself in that respect, for
That's right.
example. So these types of things happen, and toxic masculinity has been under attack for us being us. I mean, literally just our instincts. It's an interesting thing. How I'm wondering if the evolution is now changing, the pressures are becoming a social evolution change, not a physical one like we used to have, because now it's all about compassion and caring, and it's like an ethereal replacement of a physical evolution almost.
Well, that is very much what we're trying to communicate in the book. And let's start with the toxic masculinity, or just masculinity in general. In the old tribal days, we had to be toxic men because we had to defend the tribe. And you had to be raging with testosterone, the biggest, strongest guy. You were the one who kept the tribe in line. There were beta
And they did
males, and
not
then
ask that person to make the laws for the people either. It's like
right.
everyone had
That's
their
right.
role, right? Let's not kid
That's right.
ourselves. Like people had a position in their tribe at that time.
They did, absolutely. And most of it was based on their DNA. If they had the DNA for the big, strong guy, or they were the most attractive female that appeared to be the best one to bear children, it was all genetically done. But we needed this to survive. It was, you wouldn't say the lion today that a lion shouldn't be aggressive in killing its game. That's how it lives. That's how it evolves. But because of technology, and pretty much solely because of technology, we don't need that super testosterone charged guy to defend us anymore. We have drones. We don't need the men to be what they were, nor do we need the women to be exactly what they were. And so we can survive just fine if people serve different roles. And so toxic masculinity was admired and essential 10,000 years ago. Okay. Now it may have outlived its usefulness. And so we
But
have evolved
it's outlived its usefulness in this time. Now
in this
let's
time,
just
in this time.
let's
Right.
look at a very quick event. Saying EMP comes and knocks out all the power. We
You're
get a
right.
solar flare, we get some kind of crazy event, and now we've got all these men who are unprepared
That's right.
because
And mhm,
we
that's
don't
right.
have that, right?
Right. And you're right. It could go back at any time. But today, in first world countries, not like the US, in general, it's outlived its usefulness. And in the old days, the women would be relegated to farming, taking care of the kids. Now, because of technology, there really shouldn't be a difference. Women have taken their role, minorities, other people. We used to be prisoners of our DNA. You were going to be what your DNA said you were going to be. You were going to be strong. You were going to be weak. Your role was going to be tending to the house and bearing children.
And
Now
even
we
bigger
have
than that,
children.
you were a prisoner to your DNA, and then you were a prisoner to your region, because it's not
Mhm.
like you traveled like you used to. It's not like you could communicate that you're in another place like we are right now. I mean, we're opposite ends, we're 2,000 miles apart, and we're talking in real time.
That's
So
right.
these types of things weren't available. It's not like the attention that a woman or that a man could garner from the opposite sex was at the levels that it is now. It is
Right.
in, I mean, with these, dating apps and things like that. So it's so many things in our, I think Brett Weinstein talks about with Heather Heining about how we haven't caught up to the evolution of the technology, right? Our evolution hasn't caught up to it. The hunter gatherer's guide, I think, to the world, something
Mhm.
like that is.
That's right. That's
So
right.
so yeah, please continue. It's just like I said, it's just interesting how we all have these ideas.
Well, I mean, I think it's just totally fascinating. Now, you're right. If an apocalyptic event occurs, that testosterone may be very useful again. But at this point in time, and you see it now propagating through society, as soon as the technology hit, women could change roles. All of a sudden, they had washing machines, they had vacuum cleaners. It was no longer necessary because of technology for them to stay home all day and take care of the kids in the house. Okay. So then women started
And
working
Nixon didn't
almost.
help with that. Let's not kid ourselves. Nixon put in a place. A lot of people do not know this, but Nixon said if you wanted to get ahead in the world, you should both earn income.
Mm-hmm,
He said
mm-hmm.
get a two income family. So everybody did it because everybody's American and we all want to get ahead. And now it became kind of a standard thing where having a single income makes it even more challenging. And there seems to be
That's right.
a social attack on the family from other angles that we won't get into, but please continue.
No, no, you're absolutely right. And then what happened is we used to live in tribes, and the tribes provided our social support. Tribes wouldn't let someone be homeless. They would find a place for them. They wouldn't let them be unemployed. They'd give them some jobs to do, right? So the tribes would take care of us. There was the perfect unit for our DNA to evolve because they were a closed system, but big enough for things to happen. And then they provided our sacred values, our social values. They kept people in line. They sent everybody out in a coming of age ceremony to prove that they were worthy of reproduction. Basically, that was the reason, even though they didn't realize it. And so it was a really amazing unit to promote evolution. But now we have the technology, and then women started going out in the workforce. We were able to travel, just as you have said. We left our tribes. Ethnic groups don't necessarily live together in ghettos or cities anymore the way they used to. When the immigrants first came over, the Jewish, the Italian, the Irish, they lived with each other in an extended tribe. That no longer is the case. People live all over the place. So our new tribes, or our Facebook friends, our political parties, people we affiliate with, and they
And it's
determine.
even exacerbated there from COVID because now we're
Yes,
working remotely.
yes,
So
absolutely.
we've got people like, for example, I'm looking to actually move out of the city to a place where I can become a little bit more self-sustaining, but still keep my remote job. So I'm able to take the advantage of the city, the city advantage of the technology while still living a different lifestyle than we ever used to. And used to never be able to live those two simultaneously. You had to choose one or the other.
Oh, right. And I think overall it's a better lifestyle. But we now, the people who give us our sacred values, or whether you watch CNN or Fox, right? It's what podcasts you listen to. It's who your social media friends are. And these are our new tribes, because whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you typically swallow the sacred values hook, line, and sinker. So when you talk to
Yeah.
Democrats, they can tell you there are 5 or 6 issues. The Republicans are the same. They buy into the whole thing. They want leadership. You have your influencers who are your leaders through the internet. And this is the beginning of this hive mentality, right? And it's changed dramatically the way we interact. We no longer interact through pheromones and as hormonally as we used to.
Right.
And humans will never fully evolve past that, again, because there's no pressure to do it. But we used to
Right. And
interact.
I don't think it goes away. It might atrophy to an extent, but I don't know if it'll completely go away. And to that question, this is where it's very interesting. We're seeing I, I'm kind of become very libertarian minded, very
Mhm,
self-reliant. It's not, it's just, I believe in that small community out, local out. We should have that small piece. Everyone should know somebody that can help them in a bind,
mhm,
that
mhm,
I know that doesn't exist, but in a beautiful world, I wish everyone had that one person. Right. So in this world that we live, this libertarian world, it's about freedoms. That's what it's always about, the freedoms. And I
mhm.
just lost my train of thought on it. Could you refresh me
Well,
again what you were talking
with the
about?
freedoms, we have lost a little bit because, again, we don't have the big tribes and family units that support us anymore. And people are very alone. And you see this in the depression of young people. You see this in a lot of
Right.
things that we see in
Oh, no.
society.
Yeah, and that was the point I was trying to say. I apologize. So that the algorithms of these social medias are not helping us. They're putting us in these echo chambers where they either want us to combat each other because that gets engagement, or they want us to agree 100%, which doesn't allow for any additional growth because you don't hear any competitive ideas, for example. So even in addition to your technology dumbing us down because we don't have the pressure to think, we're now getting our own thoughts reinforced to us like they're correct without the pressure of challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you have an interaction like you and I have a difference of opinion that's 180 degrees, and I say water's wet, and you say no, water's dry or something, whatever that is, the ideological idea, we are already on opposite ends because we've been told the whole time to believe what we've been thinking because it puts us in that algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
which
And
creates
there's an
almost like a
addictive
double dumbing
component.
down.
There's an addictive component to it, because when you're looking at social media and you get a like, for example, they've done studies that say it puts out some
Dopamine.
dopamine or oxytocin, both of which make you feel pretty good and very satisfied. And you can actually become addicted to likes and reinforcement that you get on social media. Well, it's easy to find that drug of reinforcement because of our technology. In the real world, you don't find people who reinforce you all the time. And so
No.
people, they get addicted to this stuff. It's been shown. Donald Trump had, during his presidency, I believe it was 25,000 tweets. And if you were a fan of Donald Trump, each of those tweets just reinforced a tiny bit hormonally what your belief system was. I mean, why
Right.
would you possibly tweet that much unless there was a reason? And he was extremely smart about using social media in that way, and it worked out for him in general.
Yeah, he knew how to use it, tap into the emotional part. And
He did.
that's what's happening is we are actually losing the reason.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we talk more reason, we talk more logic, meditation, introspection, Ryan Holiday and the stoicism, right? We talk about some certain people. We're not living that. We're living emotionally because we don't have the logical reason to even explain how we got to an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So like when I speak with someone, it can be about anything, but generally is ideological, right? Some kind of political ideas. Okay, tell me your point. X equals Y or something. Okay. How did you get there? Show me your work. 3, 4 questions in, if it's ideological, it crumbles. It usually crumbles apart. If you can't show me how you became, you know, into this mindset, it we're unable to communicate those parts. And
Mm-hmm.
what we do is we just come in and say, I'm this and you're this, and we don't have the bridge anymore. And I think that's what we're losing with this lack of intelligence. I think that's the intelligence we're losing.
I think you're exactly right. It's the prefrontal cortex. And remember, the prefrontal cortex is the latest part of the brain to develop. It doesn't fully develop until people are in their mid 20s.
Yeah,
And it's a
25, I think,
part,
right?
right? And, more or less. And it's a part that is programmed by experience. So your emotional midbrain is what it is, and it doesn't need to be programmed. It's naturally emitting hormones that make you feel good or bad depending on the input. But that prefrontal cortex is programmed over many, many years, and we have no challenges to program it anymore. So in the old days, if you were living in the woods, you had to figure out how to make a bear trap. That would be a challenge. You'd figure it out and you'd make it work. If you were a Boy Scout,
Or you'd find somebody who could help you make a bear trap, and you can help them skin it or cook it when they're done making it or something.
right,
It's kind of like one of those things because
right.
there
But you
there is a
learn
collaborative
through
effort to
through
humanity.
experience, and those who weren't smart enough may not have made it and may not reproduce. So you would learn, and in relatively modern times, they had the Boy Scouts who used to reinforce these experiences. They take them out in the woods, they teach them how to hike and camp, and some of my smartest friends were Eagle Scouts way back in the day. Now it's
That was
no
me. I
longer.
was an Eagle Scout.
Were you okay?
Yes, sir.
And it taught you a lot, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And
Yeah.
these are the guys who can figure anything out. I have one friend, you ask him anything, he'll figure out how to fix it, how to make it work. and he's super smart, but you just don't develop that kind of smartness from what we have today. And schools have dumbed down the experience. My son years ago had to build a Rube Goldberg mechanism um, that had to
Okay, let's
last.
explain what a Rube Goldberg is.
Okay,
So basically, what it is it's a machine that has highly complex parts and takes many different maneuvers to do a simple task.
right,
So, for example, you've seen this thing where a ball goes into a bucket and drops down, and then it shoots this water over here, and all this stuff, and then ends up just unscrewing a lid, for example. That would
right,
be what a Rube
right,
Goldberg. Okay, so please
exactly.
continue.
So older folks, that would have been, kind of a fun challenge. But he and his classmates completely melted down when they tried to do this because they had no physical experience of cause and effect. It was a great learning experience, even just building that one thing. You remember erector sets, you remember building things, and people don't do that anymore either. So we have
We had
lost that.
Lego. We had Lego cities because we were German, so that's what we did. So
Right. And but now everything is in 2 dimensions or even 3 dimensions online. And even when you're a gamer, it's not building things in the old way. It's a more of a reflex thing. And so I think we're losing a lot of that because again, we don't need it to survive.
great example to your point about gaming. So you're pushing your little controller. First of all, it's not like a real gun, for example, but every time you pull the trigger, the hand vibrates. That is not how a real firearm, for example, would react in
That's
that
right.
situation. So you come out in your brain, I've been gaming for years. I can handle a gun, and you have no idea what that thing can do in your hand and how the kick is and how the recoil and how to load, all these other things that you see it, but you don't have the tactile, you don't have the actual physical experience of experiencing it when it's on a screen.
Right.
Hopefully that
Exactly.
makes sense.
So as AI moves forward, at some point in the near future, it's going to be able to pass something called the Turing test. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, Alan Turing test, where basically you should be able to have a conversation with it and not tell whether it's a human responding or whether it's a machine, basically.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So way back in the 40s, or maybe it was 1950, Alan Turing came up with this test because he was thinking about artificial intelligence even back then. He was a brilliant mathematician, and the question was, when can you say a machine is thinking? And our AI today is very close to being able to have conversations that are indistinguishable from human conversations. And so the legal system will one day soon face a challenge where somebody says this AI is a thinking being, it should have all the rights that humans have. How could you tell the difference? And then some court somewhere is going to probably say that's correct because we can't find a way to differentiate between a human and AI. And once that happens, it's going to be a very interesting time. First of all, then we won't be able to turn AI off because it'd be amount same as murder. We're going to be competing with AI in every area. Will AI be able to vote, for example? Why not? If it's a sentient being, if it's an entity, why not give it the vote? Will it be allowed to own businesses? Will it be allowed to enter into relationships and have legal status and be able to inherit the money when someone dies? And I think people will enter into serious relationships with AI in the future.
People already one of the there's an AI model that has double the followers of like the next human person or something, and it's or some I
Well,
saw something crazy like that, and you're just like, what? There's movies like Ex Machina, to your point, the Turing test, dystopian beyond dystopia. Her, right? Her with Scarlett Johansson's the voice, I
mm-hmm,
think, on the phone,
mm-hmm,
and it's River Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix, I think, is
mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm,
user, right? So to your point, I mean, it is, and it's interesting because what's it called, alignment. We
mm-hmm,
have the alignment issue. We haven't even
mm-hmm,
talked about that.
mm-hmm.
How are we going to give a sentient thing something that we're not aligned with? I mean, it doesn't, it energy needs are different. It doesn't, but I guess there are machines that eat biomass now. So maybe there's a solution there, but like, you know what I mean? How would you diet and how would you do? It just seems like you'd have to have almost two different societies. It'd be
Well,
difficult to integrate.
that's the question. Right now, we can't even handle racism between humans who are slightly different colors, right? So, how are we going to even handle this? And then human beings may no longer be the apex species on the earth because we'll be working alongside AI that can perform tasks much better than we can. And so the question is, how are we going to compete? And interestingly enough, we may have to start evolving again to compete with AI because we may have to be getting smarter and things like that.
Yeah, I think we go
Fine.
back to chimp brain. I think we go back to Hulk smash. I'm sorry. I mean, I hate to say it, but that kind of is our default. That's like our it's kind of our chimp default. That's our reset button is just start over kind of.
Well, it might be. We don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not ascribing malicious intent to AI. I think AI
not
is
at
going to
all.
be
No.
benign, you know.
Well, yeah,
But
AI isn't, let's be honest, AI is it is the way to process information. It is a pattern recognition tool. It is all these beneficial things. It is how we implement it that makes it a good or bad entity.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
ultimately, it seems like because of it's kind of the nuclear thing, real quick. It's a 0.001 chance that the button's going to get pushed, but the button getting pushed is a 99.9% chance of nuclear annihilation across the board. So the risk reward is almost like not there. It's where's AI's risk factor percentage wise for that point, whatever percent of it getting implemented or taking over in a way,
Right,
you know?
right, exactly. And I think there's a lot of things that will protect us from that. And let's face it, we have a lot of malicious humans out there that are pretty clever. And so whether AI
Yeah,
will
because
be
AI is a tool that which they use, right? I mean, just like a
right.
gun would be used by a terrorist or a missile,
Mhm.
things like.
Right. So is it going to be that much more clever and malicious? We don't know. But I don't believe AI is going to be a threat. I think it's going to do a lot more good than harm. And I think also the lawyers in these big companies like Google and OpenAI are going to make sure there's some protections in place to make sure they don't get sued if something terrible happens. And so I'm not worried about AI hurting us in that way, but I'm worried about what it means to be human might change to the point that we're not going to be too proud of ourselves in the future. And I think it's already starting to happen, unfortunately.
So you mentioned a couple positives about the AI because I read a couple of things where you said it's not as scary as we think. I'd love for you to share a couple of those points if you could. And then that last point that you made, let's talk about that little bit of that scary part of how we're going to change and what are the ramifications of our changing might be.
Right. There's an interesting reason that I think that AI, one of the reasons I think AI is not going to be as dangerous as we think, and that has to do with the definition of intelligence. What do you have a definition you use for intelligence? I know it's a pop question, but
Yeah, I mean, it would be reacting to the environment, being able to come up with a, a thought. Move 37, is it? What was it in the AlphaGo? Was it move 37? Some random, seemingly random thing that's just some thought that's not been thought of before, I guess would be,
the
or that ability in
definition
some
I
way.
use
Or
is a little bit similar, but it's the ability to solve a novel problem. And
there it is. Perfect.
when you think about it, humans have done a great job with the intelligence we have of solving 90% of the problems we have out there.
Adaptation is one of our strengths for sure.
Mhm. So we're not going to be able to use AI to make a much better chair, for example. We're not going to be able to use AI to make a much better house. It might be a little better, it might be more efficient, but
Right.
it's
And
not going to be
ergonomically designed, right?
right,
Ergonomically, it might be built quicker, things like that. The
right.
processes going into it, but over time, certain designs have kind of fit they've worked their way out through just the natural evolution of design.
Exactly. So AI will be able to solve some incredible problems. For example, new drugs, for example, coming up with new drugs far more quickly. It might be able to optimize electric vehicles to get 20% better range, but it's not going to change everything. It's going to be incremental because we've gotten pretty far with our civilization. And so I think that scenario of it coming up with some new thoughts that are so dramatic that they change everything, I don't think that's going to be the case. The second one I mentioned before is the legal issues that companies who produce AI are going to have to protect themselves legally. That's a second thing. But on the flip side, if a human being does something illegal or immoral, we have the justice system to protect us and put them out of humanity's way in jail or whatever. How do you punish AI if it does something wrong?
Right. Yeah, especially if it doesn't have an influencer of a human sort, right?
Right, right. And then,
I mean, but you would
will it
think
have emotion?
all the data input into an AI system would have the thoughts of a Jeffrey Dahmer and a Ted Kaczynski too. I mean, the manifestos would be in there too, wouldn't they? So I not saying that it would come to the Osama bin Laden conclusion, but it's out there to be read. It's out there to be processed.
It is. But I again believe these companies are going to put guardrails in place. And the other thing is, one of the things that I find essential. So I took a look at Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. Are you familiar
Yeah, I
with
saw
that?
you mention that, and that made me think of that right away. The three laws. So I'd love to hear you share about those. Yeah.
So way back in 1950, Isaac Asimov released his book I, Robot, which was a compendium of short robot stories. But even he was thinking about this 75 years ago. And he came up with three laws of robotics. Now, remember, robots are just AI with arms and legs, right? It's not the arms and legs you're afraid of, it's the thought process. And his first one was that a robot may not harm a human being or through its inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Well, that's pretty sensible. The second was a robot must obey orders given to it by a human being unless it conflicts with the first law. And the third one is the robot must protect its own existence as long as it doesn't conflict with the first two. These are classics. I mean,
Right.
Asimov was
And it almost closes that loop, right? He tries to close
yes,
the loop and make sense of it.
yes. He was an incredible genius. He foresaw
He
so
was. He
much.
wrote so much
Oh my
brilliant
God!
works.
I mean, a total genius. But he didn't envision the internet. He envisioned AI and robots. And the internet makes things a little bit different. He assumed you could identify artificial intelligence by looking at it. Well, we can't necessarily do that. So
I watched
I
a 30-minute AI news program that had two anchors. They cut away to different like different cutaways, different locations. The whole thing was generated. The entire thing, you could not tell. It looked like it was out of, Australian news or something, and you're just completely baffled. It's astonishing what they can do already.
It is. It is totally astonishing. So I modified in the book Evolution Ended his laws a little bit, paying complete homage to him because I have no business even being
Oh.
in the same page as him. But times have changed, right? And the first one
Yeah.
is
Well, that is one thing. That is one thing about the technologies. We're getting ideas from people that they wouldn't have been able to share. No one would have had any idea or chance to get to that idea because they're in some village in some place where and they just are able to click on a keyboard and come up with some genius thing. It's amazing.
it's amazing. So the first law I basically kept, but I said you're not AI may not injure natural living entities, which is a little different. That or through its inaction allow them to come to harm. But the second one and the third one are interesting. And the second one has to do with AI must self-identify. We need to know when we're talking or dealing with AI. And that
Through a
wasn't
meta
part.
tag or some kind of piece, a video that has a tag on it that we can blockchain throughout that has some kind of base code in it telling us that it's AI.
Right. It's super important that we know who we're dealing with. And
And
it
YouTube's kind of they haven't addressed that 100%. They've done it in a manual way. They ask as you post the video, they ask, is there any altered content that's generated and you click no or yes.
Right.
So it's not the solution, but at least covers them for a bit, I think.
Right. It helps a little bit. It's not, you're right. It's not the solution. And then we say that human AI must obey human instructions like Asimov and not initiate new tasks without a human command because we don't want it running off and doing its own thing. Now, how you define that, is interesting. And then the third thing that's not part of the three laws is that we need legislation, regardless of the Turing test, to allow us to be able to terminate or pause AI. And while it may be a thinking being, it is not a being that cannot be reproduced or um, turned back on at will. I mean, when you terminate a human or an animal, it's permanent. And we have the ability to back up memories and things like that. But if AI gets out of hand, we need the ability to turn it off.
Interesting. So let me ask you this, because it does make a question about terminating. When you turn it off, you terminate. Are you talking about pausing where it would be at if it started getting out of hand? Because then it would, at that point, we would probably deem it sentient in some way because we've given it enough powers to do some control things, right? Because that's where the concern is. AI can tell me anything it wants on a screen. It can tell me that I'm wrong all day. As long as it doesn't have a finger on my switch, I'm good. I'm good
Right,
with AI.
right,
It's
right,
it is an enhancing, it is a performance enhancing, piece to our world. But
right.
I do understand using it for efficiency's sake, but that's where it could get out of hand. I like that you had some slight tweaks to that.
Yeah, because if we can't turn it off, it's that 1% nuclear bomb thing you talked about.
Yeah.
And we need the ability to turn it off. We need the ability to understand that it's not human. And we sort of have to decide what gives something or somebody rights. Is it an homage to a million years of evolution? Is it the ability to feel pain? Is it their intellectual capability? We have never really defined this. Now we're giving animals rights, but what is it? What is the characteristic that grants some entity rights? And we have to figure that out. We really don't know.
Yeah. It is a really good point because I mean, even in if you look at some people who have biblical scripture type pieces, animals don't have souls, for example.
Mhm.
So no, a lot of people would say animals don't have any kind of rights in that way. They're just parts of the natural evolution as we are apex predators. And some people think though is we are here to create the next thing to take us over, to replace us, or that is what our propagation is to create that thing. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we are we are meat blobs that are here to survive. You know what I mean? I mean, and
I
I don't mean
agree.
that doesn't change that we don't have experience, and it doesn't change any. It doesn't minimize any of the experience of humanity. But if we can look at that and just kind of face that fact, maybe we can get on with the other stuff that really matters, like experiencing humanity, knowing that we're just meat blobs going through life.
Well, you're right. Look at every other. Well, when I was a kid, I said to my father, what are people? He goes, oh, we're just big animals, right? People forget that. Every other animal on the planet has one purpose, and that's to reproduce, right? The ones who are more successful, their DNA propagates and the species evolves. Every other animal on the planet is there to reproduce. Now, interestingly, our birth rates are going down in first world countries
Alarming rates.
precipitously, alarmingly.
And it
We
is due to the ease of to you're talking about to the birth control and the ability to control ourselves and the cultural change of the woman in the workforce. That is not a judgment on it. That is just a thing that happened, right? That is these are just things to look at.
Well, we've lost the reproductive imperative. So deep in that midbrain of an animal, its goal is to reproduce. The more the merrier, right? And the ones that don't have the good DNA, that can't do the mating dance or can't thump their chest if they're a chimp, they don't get the mates. And that's how evolution works. But all that is gone now. We've lost the reproductive imperative. People can reproduce at will, but they're choosing not to.
Yeah,
My
because they're
feeling,
culturally told that children are actually an impedance in their life. I mean, really, we're culturally getting softer in addition to the lack of pressures.
right?
So
But
it's
I
almost an
also,
exacerbated kind of
Mhm.
situation.
But I also think it's the lack of pressure because if you're in the
Yeah. Oh yeah,
wild,
absolutely. It's both. It's like both. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's a double whammy. It's like a perfect
right,
storm of
right.
that for sure.
I mean, living in America, I assume my son is going to survive. We only had one child. But if I was living in an area where we needed our children to build the tribe, they needed to help us survive, to help us catch game and cultivate food, you want to have as many children as you can. We don't need them anymore. That's part of the pressure that's been relieved. And if you want to look at it holistically, we probably have too many people on the planet now. We're having a lot of climate change issues because we have more people than we could support. We're generating a lot of carbon, we're using a lot of resources. And I think people are kind of feeling this inherently the same way when you put animals in a zoo, they don't reproduce because it's not a good environment. Somehow they sense it. I think humans are sensing now that the pressures are not survival from not having enough people around, it's survival for other reasons.
That is a very interesting take. I like that. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because it does become ideologically driven in a weird way. You get a people rural based homesteaders talk about children, family, community, church, outward, and then you've got the other side that talks about government and city and whatever the other side, whatever that side
Right.
represents.
And I'm going to go, this is a little controversial, but um,
That's what we live. I live in controversy. Trust me.
oh, well, this is a little controversial. We look at our political parties, and I'm not going to favor one side or the other, but, and they both have, fabulous
They're,
talking points and representatives.
they're both highly faulted. We can get into
Yes.
that for sure.
But I view from the evolutionary perspective that the Republicans are more survival of the fittest kind of folks. And many of their policies are about if you work hard, you're going to be successful, you're going to survive, and if you don't, you might not deserve to. As a philosophy, the
Yeah, that is a
Democrats,
bootstrap philosophy. Pull yourself up. Sure, absolutely.
the Democrats are, well, we should support everyone because their circumstances may not allow them to be successful, and we should try to promote equity, which is not a survival of the fittest philosophy, right? And the question, of course, becomes, are we transitioning away from survival of the fittest? Is that a more appropriate philosophy? Or is the other one the one that will take humanity further? And I'm not going to judge either way, but there's definitely that look to their philosophies. And I just find it very interesting. And when you look at the rural component versus the urban component, right? The rural is more
100%.
Republican, which is more, we have to survive. We're out on this farm, we're in the Midwest. In the cities, everything is there for you. You don't have to survive in any fashion. The food store's right
Right.
there. Everything you
I
need
went
is
hunting
right
for
there.
my ribeye steak today
Mhm. Right.
at
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
supermarket. Right.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about this, though.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And then you look at it from this perspective. You got the one of the largest technological people in Elon Musk who speaks about having children.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he also has Neuralink.
Mm-hmm.
So I I look at motivations. I
Mm-hmm.
do. I look at motivations. I look at why people say what they do. Yuval Noah Harari wrote that book, Sapiens. I thought it was a great book, but now I'm watching that. I'm watching him speak of us as useless eaters and what to do with us, and how the global government is now collapsing, and how that's not good. And I'm sitting there as just a free person, like to your point, the frontal cortex in me, yeah, it's still developing. I'm pushing 50. It's still developing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have become more libertarian minded. No one's born libertarian. No, I was
Mm-hmm.
I was a neocon. I was a grade A neocon, lied to about Iraq and all that stuff. And now I've come to this more libertarian mindset of, community out,
Mm-hmm.
family out. it's local matters, all that. But you have to come to that.
Mhm.
You come to it through experience. You don't come to it from being told it on a screen.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what's interesting to your point is we have to really put ourselves through our own pressures in life. And a lot of times we're told to avoid it, right? Like
Right.
one of the points I was trying to make is you used to say the strongest person was
Mhm.
the one who would dominate. Now it's the weakest. It's the one
Mhm.
who is the biggest victim, right?
Mhm.
The victim
Mhm.
mentality is now taken over. So it's a complete 180 shift. So do you have concerns for your child and his future, and or do you like what's your percentage of good, bad, or whatever that white pill, black pill, where are you at on that
So,
scale?
first of all, Harari's books are great. And if you liked his books, you'll probably love Evolution Ended as well. It starts out somewhat similar, but we go a lot more, I think, into the AI world. And my book's a little newer than most of his stuff.
Right,
And
for sure. It's probably
and
by 10 years, I'd say. Sapiens is
yeah,
probably
I think
14, I'd
so.
say.
And the world's changed a lot, and the conclusions are different, but still, it's that same kind of genre. So, do I have concerns about humanity? I have grave concerns, but the answer will surprise you. And I feel like AI is here just in time to save our asses. And because the capabilities we lose, we will be able to employ AI to do a lot of stuff, make us more efficient in every way, allow us to transcend our personal weaknesses, whether it's intellectual or physical or whatever. It will give us the freedom. Anybody can be an artist with AI. I have zero art capability, but a lot of my presentations and talks, I use AI generated art. People who can't write a book can now write a book through AI. People who can't analyze a sales report can use AI to do it. People who can't build a production plant, a manufacturing plant, could use AI to help them do that. So, as we lose our capabilities, which to a large extent is caused by technology, technology will be there to help us. Now, will I take a guy 200 years in the future and put him up against one of us in a game of Jeopardy or some other game and expect him to win? No, because he's been dependent on technology his whole life. But I think humanity will survive and will actually prosper due to this tremendous technology that we've developed. And as humans, there will be less need for many of us. I think our population will eventually diminish to probably half of what it is now. We'll be engaged in a lot more fun activities. But what it is to be human, the competition, if you've been watching the Olympics, you see this incredible need to compete, which is actually to some extent driven by our need to evolve and compete. All that, how is that going to continue? How are our drive, our exploration, all that stuff going to continue in the future? I don't know.
It's a fascinating question because to your point, AI, and I love your outlook on it. It sounds dystopian to hear it like that, even though it's not a negative, it's just an outcome
Mhm.
because
It's
it
kind of
has to do with how we
utopian in a way.
because right, but it also has to do with how our perspective is like, well, okay,
Right.
we're going to shrink the population, but I'm like, they're also trying to kill us. I'm watching the manufacture of consent. I'm
Mhm.
watching them culling us
Mhm.
by culling our meat, by culling our food sources. They're sabotaging places around the country. It is a scary thing what people don't know what's going on that is not being reported. That is this underlying. It's one thing if it were to happen to your point, like the natural evolution of humanity doing that. I think people are pushing for this to happen. And
Mhm.
that's the concern is that they're pushing for this generation to shrink. And instead of it happening naturally. And I think when you push it, it's kind of like an early adopter of a technology, a television. It's not quite ready yet. And that is the humanity scare of the time that we switch it over because it could be that point of 1 minute too early, 1 minute too late to that. But AI great with resource management, pattern recognition. It would have the integration, those types of things for those types of outcomes. But I love that point of you would just need a human to say okay at least, or hit okay. This is,
Right.
and then are you sure? Okay, that's
Well,
we need a Windows 98 double click, I
right.
guess.
Well, think about sexual attractiveness. We were talking about population decline and things like that. So, in the 1970s and 80s was the sexual revolution, and everything was about sex. People wanted to be as attractive as possible. Look at photographs from back then. Look at the disco era. Dancing was a mating dance back then, right? And
Yep.
now look at modern times. People dance with anybody, nobody in particular. They just jump up and down. Look at the way they look. Now, people attractiveness for a lot of people is not really a thing. The population
Very
is now
fluid.
overweight,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Sexuality is
Right.
fluid. All the things that we used to think about. Now, look at the
But that
sexual.
is a cultural. I think Camille Paglia talked about that. Douglas
Mhm.
Murray and Camille Paglia talked about that in the both Roman and Greek time. Is at the end of a cultural, when a cultural decline is about to happen, those specific cultural things happen in the fluidity, the kind of just softness of things. My concern is how much does technology make that a permanent thing going forward versus it, like, to as the cyclical that I kind of mentioned earlier. But please
Right.
continue. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think you're right. Now, I think it's going to be more permanent because, again, if people don't feel threatened, these great cultures didn't feel threatened, right? So the
Right.
need, the reproductive imperative wasn't as great for those cultures. But look at what's happening in society. That beauty in certain areas is being vilified, right? And you go to Walmart and you see um, the models are now, plus size. The whole,
Sports Illustrated swimsuit model,
oh my God,
Lizzo getting attacked for losing weight, Adele getting attacked for losing weight and getting healthy.
right.
Healthy
And,
is a
and
far right. Exercise is a far right. I don't know if you're far right if you exercise or something. I heard
yeah,
that
and
in an
and that
article.
same magazine that had it wasn't Sports Illustrated, but there was another one who had plus size models. It was one of the glamour magazines, and it says, "Is competitiveness the new sickness or the new neuroticism? Being
Right.
competitive,
It's like
being
a toxic
right,
competition is toxic.
right, having a
It
healthy
is like
weight is
the key.
toxic, right, right,
Right.
exactly, and that's not how we survived. I'm not saying that we didn't sometimes
There is
overdo
no
it, but
judgment on anything, but there are net better and net worse. There are net better and net worse ways to live. That's just a thing. That's how life works. This isn't a judgment on any of them. You
right,
still have your will to choose how you wish.
right, exactly. So it's going to be interesting times coming up.
It sounds very interesting. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Love to talk with you again, JJ. We've been in at about an hour. I can talk more if you like. If you have a couple other things you'd like to talk about, or we could, if you want to share all your the ways to get in contact with you, we call it
Sure,
a time and then have another conversation down the road.
sure. Well, the place that if you want to get my book, it's on Amazon. It's called Evolution Ended. It has an AI generated audio book available, which most people tell me sounds pretty real. So if you're interested in trying the AI version, that might be fun.
That's going to be me because I don't do reading very well. I would say AI. That's one of the greatest things is like I need a PDF reader that I can drag all the things in to read to me because I absorb much better in this meet with the medium with listening
Well,
versus
Mark,
reading.
grab the audiobook and let me know what you think. What happened was
I will.
Amazon said, we can do this for you. And they didn't even charge to do it. And I pressed the
Nice.
button and I selected the voice. I had 6 options. And 15 minutes later, the audiobook was published,
Wow. I'm
which
gonna
I
have to
thought
check
was
that
cool.
out.
Yeah, I thought it was
That
pretty
is
cool.
neat.
My website is jjjerome.com. I'm on Twitter. It's jjjerome11, but you could just search for jjjerome. And there's a lot of interesting things on Twitter because I, uh, post other people's stuff as well. But there's a lot of interesting insights there. And that's where you can find me.
Excellent. All right. Any parting words before we call it a day?
Not at all. I really enjoyed the conversation, and it's a brave new world out there. Everybody needs to be aware of what's happening.
It is a brave new world. I've got so many podcasts upcoming to talk about all technology and how this is affecting us. So thank you, JJ Jerome. Evolution Ended.
Thank you.
That's the book. Everyone come and check it out. I'm going to hit end here, but don't go anywhere, JJ, because we'll talk afterwards. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're now officially part of the Knocked Conscious family, sir.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
1, 2, 3, 4. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say, good night, sweetheart. Good night.